Okay, it is about 8:33 and it is Monday, January 18th, 2021. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration today, all day. And I want to welcome you to week number three. Week number three. This week will mark the halfway point. Once we're finished with this week, um, then we will head to the second half of the course already. And it won't take long, for you guys to get it. The It's interesting that, like I said, I'm paying attention to what's going on, as you already know, with the political scene as well as the pandemic. But I have to pause to be able to say to many of my students that this is a very special day for me as far as Dr. King's birthday. I was one of the people who went to Washington in 1982 for the mass rally to have Dr. King's birthday be declared a national holiday. And with the help of the late Mayor Harold Washington, who used to be a Senate, he used to be a state senator in Illinois. He drafted legislation which made Dr. King's birthday a state holiday. Well, he assisted me, and I put together the petition that was signed and circulated throughout the state of Illinois that many people signed, and we took a whole bunch of them, thousands. I mean, I don't remember. It was so many that it's ridiculous. And so I worked with Operation Push at that time, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and other civil rights leaders, and I was heavily involved in that. So that's a little history about your professor you should be aware of. I actually had a chance to meet Dr. King when I was a kid, living on the west side, and Dr. King used to live on the block where I used to go to this. It was called the BBR, Boys Brotherhood Republic, and he lived there on Hamlin, right down the street. And I had a chance to meet him. He was, walking down the street one day, and so somebody said, "Go, Dr. King." And so a bunch of us kids, we ran up and we shook hands with him. It was funny back in those days. We didn't have cameras ready like now, but I had a chance to shake hands with him. I never forgot that, and always remember. But yeah, I'm part of history. In fact, one of the last things I'll tell you about that is that when I went to that big rally in Washington, D.C., and if you look out on Facebook, you'll see I posted the button that we wore, and you'll see. Well, anyway, what happened is that it was at a rally that after the rally that evening that Stevie Wonder issued out and gave us 45s. These were records, 45 records of and released for the first time his version of Happy Birthday to Martin Luther King. And I probably have that somewhere in one of the boxes, but I had it for many, 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 many years. I moved. That goes back to '82. That's how long ago that was. That was quite a thing. So whenever I hear the song played, I always shed tears because I remember when I first heard it, and Stevie did it live for us, and we were off stage. We were clapping and jumping up and down. I'll never forget that. It's one of the highlights of my life. You know, and one of my favorite speeches is his "I Have a Dream" speech. And you know, I said this readily that it was because of him and his commitment and things that he did and other civil rights leaders, but he was the motivating force. I was able to successfully go through and get into a good law school and get a law degree in Northwestern University School of Law and be able to practice law. So I'm ever indebted, ever indebted. I am excited about the fact that I had a chance now to live to see the first African American um, president of the United States, and now the first African American female vice president. She's African American and Indian, and she's a dynamo. I don't know if you get a chance to. CNN did a great special on her life, and it was just powerful. I had a chance to look at it. My wife and I sat down and looked at it yesterday. But one of the cool things about her is she is being uh, um, given the oath on Inauguration Day by uh, Justice Sotomayor. And those of you who know anything about her, she was the first Latina to and female one. Well, she was one for yeah. I think she might have been no Ruth Bader before her, but anyway, she's the one who's going to administer the oath. And one of the things that Kamala Harris is going to do, she's going to use the Bible of the late Justice Thurgood Marshall, who was a powerful man, first African American on the United States Supreme Court. And a lot of people don't know this, the younger guys, I do, that the famous Brown versus the Board of Education case of 1954, he was a lawyer and he argued that case and won that case to overturn the segregation of Plessy versus Ferguson. So, you know, I know a lot of stuff. I know a lot of things, and I've had a chance to be exposed to some really great people. So I'm rather excited about it, and I thought I wanted to share that with my students today because such an important thing. And you know, I was telling somebody he was a drum major for justice. You know, he believed in justice. And guess what are we learning about? Criminal justice. And very important that we focus on what's going on. So anyway, glad to be here in the position I'm in today. And I have a smile on my face. But and then we have a last, I guess I keep saying last things. I thought about something else. Raphael Warnock, who is the first black U.S. senator from Georgia, who was a Democrat, was elected. He is the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. So why am I mentioning Ebenezer Baptist Church? Because that's the church Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. pastored when he was in Atlanta. So, yep. So that's the state. That was his state, Georgia, Dr. King. So it's really some great things happening for all people, all ethnic groups. And you know, he didn't do things for just for blacks. He did things in the name of justice and civil rights so that women can have rights, men can have rights, LGBT people later could have rights, and that our country needs to return back to that. That's why our movement is for diversity. This school, I love it because that's one of our pillars, one of our transferable skills, and we recognize that. The guy that's in office now that will soon be out in 2 days. I mean, it's almost over. So anyway, let's get on with it. I got to see something at 10 o'clock on TV that I heard about. So let's share my screen. On share. There we go. Okay, so Kara, you doing good this week? Yeah. Wait till you get to week 6. This is just a halfway point. Oh God, you're going to be the one that I look at. Since I had one student that was always at the lectures, and you know, who understands a lot of things. You know, and you know what? I appreciate students. One of my students, former student that I had, now I can say her name. Her name was uh, Shakira Robinson. She posted on Facebook some things that made me cry. She graduated, and she talks about how she was motivated by my adversity as a springboard to success. And you know, I feel good when I know that what I'm doing is helping students. That's my goal. That is my goal, and the school knows that about me. So I got many more years to go. I'm only 70, so I'm just a kid. All right, so here we are at week 3, guys. Week 3, and then we crossed over next week into the second half. The recordings are down here at the bottom. Let's take a quick look at the calendar, which is running out each week. And you see where we are. We are here at the 18th. And here we have our topic. Complete the activities, verbal and nonverbal communication, communication barriers, and written communication. And so that's the topic. Yeah, professional communication skills. We're going to talk about that a lot. One of my favorite areas in criminal justice. Professional writing is your initial post. Talk about that, and reply post due Saturday the 23rd. And then on Sunday the 24th, written assignment infographic. By the way, when you do infographics, please put them in Word form. Some students don't. And then do a mid-quarter student survey about the course. And then, of course, you know, your infographic is going to be right here. Live classroom lecture, key phrase. And then we will be here next week. And notice what happens. After next week, we will be in February. And you go and look at February, and you see that when we have our lecture on the first week of February, we have 2 lectures that week, but that's week after next. That's not this week now. And then the course ends again. I guess some of you say, why do you keep saying that? If you saw what I see on this end, you would understand why I do it. Because I can tell you inevitably, at least one student, sometimes 2 or 3, will come back and say, I'm sorry, I forgot. You know, I had a brain cramp or something. Says nothing I can do for you. After the night, when it says 12, when that clock strikes 12, bam, you know, that's it. I can't do anything for you because it is then the 10th. So all your assignments that are not turned in by the 9th, then you can't turn them in. So, and I'll be talking about what assignments I'll take for the second half of the course next week. I'll discuss that. I'll discuss that today. So So let's go back to the course home. Let's take a look at what you already know. Refresh it. Let's open it. So your week 3 announcement, professional communication skills. And we already said verbal and nonverbal communication, communication barriers, and written communication. Then the discussion post involves professional writing, and then complete the written assignment infographic, which I will give you details on and go over the rubric with you as well. Remind you about the survey, and then you know about my motto: adversity is the springboard to success. Okay. And so now let's look at the assignments before we get into the lecture. So here's the assignment infographic. So it tells you here, dealing with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You're going to, as it says, you think critically about the rights of offenders and how these rights may adversely affect justice for victims by tying the hands of police, often making it difficult to control or deter crime. One of the issues that often is brought up when that comes up as far as law enforcement is the infamous Miranda versus Arizona case and the Miranda warnings. I've already told you guys about my inside information about Miranda. You remember that? About my former law professor, Fred Inbow, that I had. Did I talk to you guys about that? I know I talk about it in criminal law, but I think I talked about it here. You remember that? Well, let me tell you about that. As you already know, the Miranda versus Arizona case, 1966 case, I believe off the top of my head, decided by the United States Supreme Court, decided that they bring in the infamous Miranda warnings. You know, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. And then it says some more stuff, and I'm just paraphrasing it. But in that case, the United States Supreme Court considered techniques of interrogation that were done by the police in Arizona, and that they decided they were violations of the constitutional rights, basically the Fifth Amendment of the individual's rights. And so the decision criticized the techniques that the police used. Now, the techniques that the police used for interrogation and confessions was out of a book that was written by Professor Fred Inbow and a guy named John Reed. And Professor Inbow said that he felt personally maligned by the United States Supreme Court, and he felt that the Miranda warnings crippled law enforcement and shackled them. Because as you know, that when the person is in custody, that's when you give them the rights before you question them, because anything you question them about, if they're in custody and you don't give them Miranda rights, can be thrown out or quashed with a motion and a hearing that we attorneys, the defense attorneys, would file to prevent that evidence of that statement from being used in a case. And even if it's a bad statement, you couldn't use it. You wouldn't have the right to use that. So that's one of the big ones. Some other big ones involve the search and seizure, the rights to search, requiring that you can only have a warrant or a search warrant or arrest warrant, but upon probable cause. And you'd have to go through the process of going to a magistrate and getting that. And if you did search without that unless it fell into one of the exceptions, then you would find that that evidence could be thrown out. So there's arguments that it says here that the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, which guarantee due process, protecting against unreasonable search and seizures and interrogations, as I just shared with you examples, may limit law enforcement. So you're going to discuss why these rights are so important in our justice system. Professor Inbal died because every time a case came up involving Miranda issues, he would submit what we call an amicus brief. You guys should be familiar with amicus briefs if you weren't before during the election. Remember all of those attorney generals from the various states prepared those amici briefs, we call them, but it's amicus, and amici is more than one. And what those are suggestions to help the court reach a decision. And sometimes they are very persuasive, and sometimes they're not, as in the case of the election. But Professor Inbal, on behalf of an organization that I've forgotten the name of, but we call the National Association of Prosecutors, would present a brief all the time. So anyway, there's that question about you're going to analyze that and compare the advantage and disadvantage of the rights to determine whether the rights are reasonable or do they unduly limit justice for victims. So here's the point. So if the police do not properly follow the procedures of the Fourth Amendment, such as obtaining a search warrant properly, and you have an illegal search, or go beyond a stop and frisk or a Terry stop, and Ohio versus Terry, you're familiar with that case, right? Where you can briefly stop a person and you can pat them down, but it's for the safety of the officer, and if there's some evidence of weapons or contraband, but primarily weapons, then you can seize that, and then it elevates itself to probable cause and person's under arrest. Of course, so that if you're going to question them after that, you know what you got to do. Speaking of and then the Fifth Amendment, of course, saying that the police. So here's what my point is. Somebody might say it's unfair that if the police messed up with not giving the rights properly, or not giving the rights at all, or not obtaining a search warrant, or going beyond what they should in terms of search, and it doesn't fit into one of the exceptions, that the case be thrown out, or either that the evidence cannot be used that would possibly and probably convict that individual. Is that unfair to the victims? Yeah. Well, here's the point. If, as I explained to people, that you have to understand is that the Constitution protects us as citizens from government intervention without following the rights that are established under it, the Bill of Rights. And so, and like I said, here we're dealing with two of them, the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. Then, as a victim, you should appreciate that the police or law enforcement should do their jobs well. I as a defense attorney, would tell people that they said, do you feel bad as the defense attorney when a person walks away? I says, no, because I have a job to do to represent individuals and be able to provide a defense for them. A good defense, not the lame defense that I heard some of these attorneys on TV saying the other day about why those people entered the Capitol. They said that the defense they had was that the president told them to go. I said I would be laughed out of court because that happened all the time. Says, well, why did you shoot the person? Well, my gang leader told me I had to. Okay. So then you're not really guilty. Wrong answer. But the point I'm saying is that we have to have the system to protect individuals. So you have the rights of the individuals and the rights of the victims. Law enforcement and all those involved, including forensic people providing valid information. There's been some forensic people who have done something underhanded, and cases have been thrown out because of that. There's been coarse confessions. We had a police officer here in Chicago who was Commander. I've drawn a blank on his name. He's passed away now, but I'm familiar with this police chief, and they used to force confessions out of people, beat them, or put cattle prods on them, or waterboard, anything. The point of the matter is that it's not unfair to throw out that kind of evidence. So, but what happens is law enforcement has to be professional, and that's what I always tell my students. So, create an infographic or chart showing both sides afforded by the Fourth and Fifth Amendment and the importance of protecting these rights. And this kind of helps you out here. Submit your complete assignment. Now, please, please, please make sure you have sources to support your statements, citations in the body, and references at the end. It's an infographic, but make sure you have statements to support your positions. I cannot tell you how many times students have really good stuff, but they don't give credit for where it came from. And we already talked about that throughout your whole tenure at this school, at least in my classes, about academic integrity and citing your sources. Well, those are the kinds of things that you're going to make sure that you do. So as we view the rubric, remember what I said. Act as if these three don't exist. I tell my students, cross these out in your mind. Look at this column. So what you're going to do is, with the Fourth and Fifth Amendment may limit law enforcement, you're going to present clear and comprehensive analysis of how it may limit the efforts of law enforcement. The importance of the Fourth and Fifth Amendment, clear and persuasive discussion of why the Fourth and Fifth Amendment are so important. Advantages and disadvantages, clear and comprehensive the comparison of the advantages and disadvantages of the Fourth and Fifth. And then infographic or chart showing both sides of the rights afforded by Fourth and Fifth Amendment, clear, comprehensive. I would submit to students, they say, oh, it doesn't say provide citations and references. Good people, you should always give credit to where you got the information from in your writings. That's an academic integrity issue. That's an issue that we as lawyers, when we present our cases, we cite cases and sources to support our arguments. Well, that's the same thing that you do. So some people are so tunnel-minded, they say it didn't say it in there. Do you know the answer to these questions without providing research? No. And don't always cite me. Some students cite me. That's okay. But I want you to come up with some resources. There's plenty of information out concerning the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. Plenty. Okay? Now, any questions about it? Okay. One of the questions that sometimes students will ask is, what's the length of this? The answer to that question is very simple. Whatever it is that to adequately cover each of the issues. That's how you do it. A person should be able to read this that doesn't know anything about the Fourth or Fifth Amendment and how it might affect rights of defendants as well as victims. And if they see your thoroughly researched and well-written paper with your own research, with your own writing, they should be able to have that information. And that's the key. That's what you're going to be called upon to do something like that at some point when you become employed. You do know that. So don't just remember you heard it here first. I don't think this is the first place you ever heard that. All right, so that's the assignment for that. Then we have the discussion, and at least 250 words, the importance of writing that is accurate. Now, I'm going to jump ahead about lecture and say this to you about this. I said this before week 1 in communication, that'd be one of our critical skills, and that employers are requiring it. You must be professional in your written and oral communication. Written communication must be very professional, must be, and look what it says, accurate, concise, factual, professional, and unbiased. It should provide information to the reader, because one of the documents that you have prepared is some kind of report. Let's use law enforcement, for example, police reports. You'll have them in other areas too, where you're writing. And you're going to have correct information, factual. It's going to have to be right, grammatically correct, because we defense attorneys would use incorrect grammar to make you look bad in court. And so also, it must be factual. It must be accurate. Did I tell you about how I won a case because of a police report saying that an incident happened April the 31st? And the witness? Well, in my other classes, I've talked about it, but here's the deal. I had a case where my client, and I'm looking at the police report. First of all, I had the law enforcement officer understand. I said, officer, did you prepare a report? And he said, yes. I says, your report says that the incident happened on April the 31st. And he said, well, that's what the victim told me. You should know better. So anyway, he wrote that in his report, and I read it. The jury heard it. And so I went through some more questioning, but I'm just showing you this incorrect issue. So then the witness got on the stand, the primary witness, and he said, yes, it was definitely the 31st of April. I said, are you sure? And the judge and the state's attorney objected and said, asked and answered yes. Okay. So anyway, let's spin ahead so there was some more stuff that went with this. But this is the main point, and you'll get my point here with this. When I came to closing arguments, I said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this young man did not commit this offense. And the way that they have it characterized, it's impossible for him to be guilty of having committed the offense. Let me recall the testimony of the officer that it happened on April the 31st, and then the complaining witness as well. They're incorrect. And so then I've said this. I said, when I was a kid, the state's attorney jumped up and objected. The judge said, sit down. It's closing argument. The judge knew where I was going. I said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, your honor, and counselor. I turned to each one of them when I said it. As I was saying, I learned this poem that my grandmother taught me, and it went like this. 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31, except the month of February. That's true. 30 days. And so what I did was I said, 30 days has September, April, emphasizing that was the month of the issue, June and November. All the rest have 31 except the month of February. And I said, they're wrong. And this is, they're wrong on that. They got the wrong guy. Their case is based upon incorrect information. And you cannot, beyond a reasonable doubt, find my client guilty of a crime that could not have happened. That's what I said. I felt like my cousin Vinny. Did you ever see the movie? Did you ever see it? Gotta see it. Gotta see it. I think I've mentioned it before. Gotta see it, and you'll see. I know what he was talking about. But the point of the matter is that you see my point. I appealed based on the information that was in the report, the professional written police report. I had it highlighted and circled. Man, I was like waiting. And so anyway, the state's attorney gets up after me and says, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, be not deceived by Mr. Wright's point that there was a minor mistake. And I said to myself, the skies opened up. It was like, hallelujah. He said that they were mistaken. So the trier of fact, yeah, the trier of fact, long story short, found, of course, my client not guilty. And then later on, we talked about it. They told me it was unfair for me to do that. That's what the prosecution said. I said, hey, people should do their jobs professional. So that's just one example. There's many more, but this one you'll never forget. Okay, but it can be, and you do know I'm correct about what I said. That's why sometimes I hear people post on Facebook that on the 30th day of February, I'm quitting my job. I'm no longer gonna go to work. People that don't think about what they said. Oh, what it is. There never is a 30th of February. You can only go to 29, and that's in a leap year. But so anyway, the point of the matter is, to the point I'm saying is that it says, the first thing it says, importance of accurate, concise. So that when people read stuff, you're not giving them a long narrative. Factual must be based on fact, and professional and unbiased. And so all criminal justice professionals provide written documents can either make or break their careers. I just described that point. Writing that contains errors in mechanics such as grammar or spelling can also diminish credibility. I've had cases where I've read reports and the letter I in the report was lowercase, standing alone. And I know that the letter I should always be capitalized when standing by itself, no matter where it's at the beginning of the sentence, the middle of the sentence, or the end of the sentence. And so I have read that out purposely. And so the officer, or whoever I'm questioning on the stand, would say, I said, so this has a lowercase I, because the jury doesn't see it. This has lowercase I. Says, oh well, I didn't intend to do that. Okay, all right. So what has happened is that it diminishes the credibility of that witness. Plus, after that, I just kept digging him. He was like broke out in sweat. his cool was gone. So discuss the outcome of justice professional such as a probation officer, parole officer, or a police officer submitting written documentation that was incorrect or incomplete. And research it. And you can provide sources. Remember, I already said I don't mind you cite at least one resource that examines the importance. Don't use my story. Okay. Do not use my story. Okay. Because I know students, they'll use my story. So no, don't do that, please. I'm telling you, don't do it. So in the response post, comment on a peer who raised a difference issue. So this emphasizes professional writing, and that's due tomorrow night. Then the reply post is due Saturday. Okay. I love this module so much. Even they redid the course, but they brought this back, and I was glad. And then your live classroom praise. Any question about any of these really two assignments? Okay. You should find it very interesting. This is not busy work, people. This is some good stuff that you really need to be able to do. All righty. So we're going to talk about these three areas here for the next 15 minutes, roughly. Verbal and non-verbal. We've already kind of jumped into some of this stuff. Communication barriers and written. Okay. So I already have talked about written communication, expressing how important that things should be. Notice this. I love this. Television police dramas often show police officers involved in exciting chases and dangerous situations that end in the offender being arrested as the police officer drives off looking for more action. This is not real. When an officer has an interaction with the public where an arrest is made, an officer spends a lot of hours writing reports to document what occurred. Let me say this to you. I have seen instances where police officers have tried to write a report that was not accurate based upon what really happened to try to protect themselves. That is a very dangerous practice, especially in this day and time. Do you know why I say that? Do you have any idea? I said, do you know why I said that it is a dangerous practice to try to write reports to cover up what actually happens in an incident, so that your report is not actually what happened? Why is that a dangerous practice in this day and time? What makes it dangerous? What makes it bad? Well, yeah. How about this? You know what this is? What is this? Hold on up. Yes! 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 That is what landed this guy in jail, the police officer, in the Laquan McDonald case. That's what got the George Floyd case going. But the Laquan McDonald, did you ever hear the Laquan McDonald case in Chicago, where 16 shots were fired by a police officer at a youth? Yeah, yeah. It was very, 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 very heavy and on point, because what happened, and that police officer from Chicago is now in jail because the it demonstrated that the report that was written, the young man didn't lunge at the officer, and there were other police officers who wrote reports, and unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because their attorneys were smart, they took the cases that of these police officers who were charged with writing false reports to a judge that was pro law enforcement, and he acquitted them, and that raised a lot of fear in the community, especially the African American community. But the point of the matter is that it tells you in this paragraph what I just talked about earlier. Must be honest, logical, unbiased, accurate, with no errors, read by many professionals, with the officers, sergeant, prosecutors, judges, jurors, defense attorneys, caseworkers, probation, and the list goes on and on and on. So any mistake can make the officer appear incompetent or result in the officer's credibility being questioned. So that's why that's so important. All right. So you have to learn how to do that. Now, let's talk about interpersonal communication, whether it's verbal, where there are reasons why you communicate, that is, provide information, or you're involved in an investigation, working with your fellow officers, and also giving feedback. And so it says, think about the role of a probation officer when they must document the violations of a probationer to a judge, or officer writing a narrative about an incident which they responded. In both these documents, the information could negatively impact the freedom of an individual, and therefore the writing must be truthful, accurate, and free of errors. So that's interpersonal communication. So it just kind of elaborates on it. And then effective professional communication skills, it almost says the same thing. You can take time and go over that. So now we deal with verbal and nonverbal communication. So verbal communication, of course, comes out of the mouth, and then there's written. And so, as I already said, reports, memos, arrest reports, email, even emails now, text messages have to be accurate. And it gives some examples here. Very basic verbal communication can be broken down into, it says, 5 primary areas: responding, reporting, interviewing, interrogating, and testifying. So all these areas, the officer is going to, or the official is going to work within it, and should have professional language, avoid using slang, and keep it short and sweet and to the point. And so it's very important. Nonverbal communication, as it says makes up 93% of the information. So body language is important in terms of dealing with nonverbal communication, such as gestures, tone of voice, facial expressions. Pay attention to that body. So I always talk about, let's say, for example, if you're talking to a person and you're asking them questions and you're out in the field, and you might have some suspicions that they may be a potential suspect, and you're looking at that person and you're talking to that person, and that person's eyes, they're looking around, looking in different directions, maybe even looking over your shoulder or past you or something like that. You should be aware that there may be something, either that they're getting ready to take off or attack. And you have to understand that. And so it says listening is also a part of effective communication, and very important to hear verbal cues and non-verbal cues. You have to be alert to what's happening, what your surroundings are as well. Okay. So criminal justice professionals will deal with individuals who have all kinds of issues, such as visual. You know, you could be questioning somebody and then they're not doing anything with just looking at you. And sometimes you could stop to think that that person is not answering your questions, not saying anything back to you, but you think that that person is just being obstinate, and you may elevate, but that person might be hearing impaired, or they might be sight impaired, or there might be some mental issues, or that person might be high on a substance, or there could be some cultural issues. For example, saying something to someone of a different culture, or they may take it differently from what you're saying. And like, for example, I know people that speak Spanish. For example, I learned how to speak Spanish, but I speak poquito, which means a little, but I can speak enough to communicate in most cases. And you have to be able to understand sometimes some of the things that you say, you might say them out of context, and they might answer, and then you don't have the correct information. Or there might be a stressful situation as well. In addition, it says finally that criminal justice professionals must be digitally fluent. You must be able to use technology. Sound like our class, don't it? As computers for research, report writing, and investigations, as well as using social media types. Investigations, like right now, the FBI is looking at tons and tons of video, social media sites to try to determine if parties were complacent in the insurrection or any other crime. I know that I go to a seminar every year that the National Association not National Association, but the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police have every year, and they didn't have it this year because of the pandemic. But I go every year, and they would demonstrate how social media is used to solve crimes, how people have a tendency to brag about what they're doing, like they are doing in this instance we're talking about here with the insurrection. And then also effective communication helps in terms of one of the primary tools of de-escalation, and you can talk people down. You also have, in terms of hostage situations, have individuals who are trained especially to be able to talk to individuals, or you might have a person who's in a suicidal situation where you can communicate with them. So you have to be able to do those things. And then this is the sources of where the information came from. And there's some additional sources, so. So barriers. So here are some barriers, and we've kind of talked about it. Is culture. We talked about that. Somatic, gender. Sometimes people don't know how to communicate with women, and sometimes women don't know how to communicate with men. Your perception or conclusion, you draw certain perceptions, and you think that something is the way it is. Your personal experiences, physical, the environment, emotional, and then language. Language is a big one, as I already talked about that. Okay? So these are some of the barriers, and you can look at these things as you go through each of these. Physical barrier is when an officer must interview witnesses in an outside environment, where you're dealing with the elements, or other things, like I was talking about a few minutes ago. Listening is so important. Oftentimes, and you have to do what we call active listening. Oftentimes, this is what people do. they hear some of what you said, but they're so busy preparing what they're going to say that they don't get the full context of what you said. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. You have to be what we call an active listener. Uh, says too often we do not listen actively, but rather are busy thinking about what we're going to say next and miss important information. You need to focus on the speaker. Let them complete their statements. But sometimes you'll break a chain in terms of getting information. Take notes, nod and address, you know, connect with the individual, you know. So listening is so important. If you look at my mnemonic on lawyers, you know what I'm talking about, my mnemonic on lawyers? You know what I'm talking about? Oh, yeah, okay. I'm just going to deviate for a minute and show you. Then I'll come back. I provided this for you. Remember seeing this? All the way down. And I talk about a mnemonic. See the L? There it is, right there. That's the first one, and it spells lawyers. But that's it. That's what I'm talking about. How important listening is. Okay? So I'll go back to that. Okay, we're out of time, and I'm going to finish up here. Um, we talked about this. Well, let's see. Let's go back to where I was. Yeah, so I was dealing with listening. Then you got to deal with language. So we already kind of talked about that because of diversity and individuals. You have to consider individuals could have mental issues uh, or some kind of dementia or something. And then sociological barriers to interpersonal communication arise when in disadvantaged communities. So that community policing is so important. Uh, says research shows that residents in these neighborhoods often see feedback from police in response to their calls for service as they seek to hear answers about the resolution of their complaints. Complaint often heard from residents is that the police do not give them information on how their complaint was resolved. So people want to know what did you do with this information, things of that nature. Where we talked about dealing with technology and communication as well. Where we talked about written communication, we talked about the mistakes, we talked about reports, criminal justice, and written communication. And then this is an example of inconsistent police report. I've already given you one of those, but you can take a look at that yourself. So, any questions? Okay. All right. So that's it for this week. I'm going to give you a key phrase. This is a key phrase. Active listening. That's it. Active listening, not active listen. Active listening. Give me that. that in the drop-down box, and you get your points. Well, that's it for this week. I wish you guys the best. Stay safe this week. And, like I said, next time I speak, we'll have a new administration in office, and we're moving towards change. But there's going to be a whole lot of other stuff that happens from change. As I try to tell people that there's always resistance to change, as we've already seen. There's going to be possibly even more. Yep, 2 days away. Yeah. I will be busy that day, watching and paying attention to what's going on Wednesday, and then I have to teach that night. So, all right. So I will see you next week. Stay safe and have a fantastic